Today, we welcome Jamie Malloy and thank her for taking the time to celebrate Second Chance Month by sharing her challenges related to finding housing following incarceration. Jamie is also Reentry Director for FAILSAFE-ERA. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, our pleasure. So, you're not only an example of resiliency, but of everything good that happens when a community comes together to support returning citizens. Can you talk a bit about housing barriers you faced and overcame in your journey related to incarceration?
Well, I was pretty young when I got in trouble. I was between 18 and 19 years old, and I started my probation when I was 19 years old. So for a short time, I had been living outside of my household. I had left from my parents' house when I was 18. And pretty much right when I started my probation and I had to really focus on my reentry journey and really getting everything together, I actually moved back home because I knew that my record was now going to be a barrier. My status on probation was potentially going to be a barrier, and I was going to be facing a lot of other things. So I didn't necessarily go through the process of applying and being denied for housing the way that many of my clients are going through right now. But that's because I had a family that was willing to work with me. They realized that I was going to have a lot of struggles in that area. And it just made sense for me to stay there to work. I did pay rent and save up money. So I stayed with my dad till I was 27, and that's when I bought my house. Because the one area that can't discriminate against you because of your arrest record alone is when you buy. They don't do a background check when you buy. And so, because of the fact that I had such a supportive, amazing family, I was able to side skirt that particular barrier personally. And the more I learn about those issues, the more grateful I become for that support.
Well, that's wonderful that you had that support. And as you mentioned, not everyone has that kind of a system waiting for them whenever they are released. So, can you talk a little bit more about why it's important for individuals in our community to even care about or contribute to the efforts related to housing for returning citizens?
People need a place to live. We expect people to come out of jail or prison and to become productive citizens. But I don't think a lot of people have put the time into picturing what does it look like to be a productive member of the community when you are sleeping in a tent, when you are waiting on a wait list to get into a homeless shelter for 6 or 8 weeks. How many nights would you be able to sleep outside before you went and bought a 40 in order to help you get through that night? So even if people have burned bridges with their natural supports, we can understand why maybe that family member might not feel comfortable providing a living opportunity at that time. However, somebody has to. Somebody has to be willing to give somebody that first opportunity to have somewhere stable to lay their head at night. The sooner we get people into stable housing, it's like they call it the housing first model. A lot of programs require you to have a certain amount of time sober and employed before you can get housing financial assistance, but the evidence shows that it works better backwards, that people have an easier time getting sober and getting jobs when they have housing. And the community as a whole is going to benefit from plucking these people out of the revolving door system. But there has to be somebody willing to actually give that chance and not just talk about it.
Well, that's a really good point, too. What would you say? There are so many stigmas and stereotypes regarding returning citizens. And of course, that in itself creates a lot of the barriers that we see, even for the most well intentioned person. So, what would you say to ease the mind of a property owner who is considering providing housing to a returning citizen, but maybe has some hesitations or concerns?
Those hesitations or concerns are valid. We do know that past behavior can be a predictor of future behavior. But my encouragement would be that if you know you're going to be renting to somebody that has a record, that you can set some guidelines related to that. You can say, okay, this person is on probation. I have concerns if they relapse back into drug use that my house or my rental income might be impacted by it. in order to provide you with this rental opportunity, I would like consent to be able to speak to your probation officer so that I can get a heads up if there's something that's going downhill, if you're beginning to spiral. That can be one protective measure. Another option people don't consider enough is that much of the time, people with records, serious records, realize that this is a concern and they're willing to put down 2 months security deposit. They're willing to allow you to have regular access to the home, unexpected visits. There's a lot of ways that you can meet somebody halfway and to try to pitch to them, how can we make sure that I feel protected and that you get this opportunity? And people that have a record are going to be willing to work with you because they don't have any other options. I would say a lot of times people on probation tend to make good tenants too, because they know they're going to be in hot water if they lose their place of residence. And they're also more likely to be sober even than somebody without a record. The record isn't the only way to see that somebody's struggling. And so if you have a client, a tenant who's on probation, you know that at least somebody is looking out for them and asking the questions about whether they're doing well. A regular tenant, you don't have anybody looking over their shoulder besides you. So those are just some of the ways that people can become more flexible.
Okay, and creative for sure, and trying to help these returning citizens who, you know, we're talking about folks who have, if they're getting to the place where they're able to obtain employment and housing and those types of things. These are folks who have like come through the fire and come out the other side and are maybe more likely in many cases to really do what they need to do to be successful, because they've gone through a lot of trials. Even pre-incarceration, they've probably had a lot of stuff they've gone through in their lives. So in terms of your own personal journey, because I really think it's important to shine a light on the humanity of the folks we're dealing with. We're not just talking about numbers. We're talking about human beings who are struggling like many of us, like most of us have struggled at some point in our life with something. So can you talk a little bit about maybe some unexpected wins that you saw through your process, maybe unexpected help or growth or learning, something you learned about yourself during your journey?
I think it would probably be more productive for me to give some examples from my client base, because my journey was living with my dad and paying rent until I bought my house. I didn't have anybody pop in unexpectedly and give me a chance, because I didn't need to, because I already had that. But when we contrast that with clients of mine who have full-time jobs, who have had the same job for multiple years, who have credit scores in the upper 600s, who are able to pay $1,200, $1,300 a month rent and are being denied, I think we need to look at the way that people perceive fair housing law. People believe that it is illegal to discriminate based on a record. Back when I was going through my process, that wasn't the case. There wasn't a lot of protections there. But now, 13 years later, people believe that it is illegal to discriminate based on criminal record when it comes to access to housing. And I would like to say that if that was true, then rental agencies would not be conducting a background check. They're using that information, whether we want to admit that they are or not. And so I've got individuals who are more stable than I was financially and are being turned away from places where there's no other logical reason than the background check that they submitted.
Well, and you're in such a unique position, because you've walked this path and you've gotten to a place where you're actually able to help other people who have been in your situation. What is a piece of advice that you would give to someone who maybe is earlier in their journey from reentry?
Usually the advice that we give is to do all the work that they can to mend their natural supports, because those people, if you can prove to your natural support system that you are engaged in making a change in yourself and that they have a reason to give you another chance to trust, then that can provide you with the baseline stability. It's hard to go back to a family member that you might have stolen from or you might have disappointed time and again, but that is really going to be a place that you can build from. Other than that, we recommend that people try to reach out to independent landlords and try to, unfortunately, avoid the rental agencies. More and more independent landlords are going through rental agencies in the first place. And so, even if the landlord is a community minded individual, these clients are not able to speak with that person and advocate for themselves. They're getting pre screened out of the selection process. So there are some tips and tricks for how people can identify whether a rental property is coming directly from a landlord or whether it's being funneled through a rental agency. But at the same time, as we try to give that advice, then rental agencies are getting better online as presenting themselves as direct landlords. So it's a constant battle. We're trying to find new ways every day for these clients to be able to advocate for themselves, to get opportunities, and especially not to have to pay a $25 fee every time that they're going to get denied from a housing opportunity, because that is going to impact their pockets. It's also going to impact their credit score to bounce around, getting checked over and over and over again. And so any way that we can decrease the negative impact of the housing search for these clients, then it will help them long term.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful advice. And we really appreciate you sharing your story today, Jamie, and for taking the time to talk to us about why housing is so important, not just for our returning citizen, but really it does benefit our entire community whenever we can get these folks housed and employed and get them what they need. So thank you so much again.
Thank you so much for having me. And my hope is that as more and more people become aware of this issue, we can actually start developing perhaps a list of landlords that are willing to work with direct fail-safe client referrals, and we can start changing the community from the inside out instead of from a policy perspective. So anytime that we can get the word out about these issues and bring this community together is a great thing.
Excellent point to wrap us up. Thanks again.